welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel, but you can call me Chanty. And today we are returning to the story that inspired the Disney Frozen movie, Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen. Last week I read you the first two parts of this massively long fairy tale, and it took me 20 minutes just to get through the first two stories. This week I'm just going to be summarizing the final 5 stories. Initially I was going to read them all to you, but after last week I kind of realized that that was going to be too much. I was going to end up making 2 or 3 20 to 30 minute videos. I wouldn't have much time for discussion, so I decided just to summarize it. Most of the important detail is in those first 2 stories anyways, so I feel like the last 5 stories are the best to summarize. Now for my look today, I'm going to be creating like a Snow Queen look that's like human but not human, kind of like if the Snow Queen was born a human but then some sort of like magical incident happened that turned her into this like ice creature. It's going to be like human but not human at the same time. I don't have any face paints, so I'm going to be doing the best that I can with my blue eyeshadows. Hopefully it doesn't end up looking like a low budget hypothermia queen, but we'll see. Now let's get right into it because I'm pretty sure this is going to be another long one, and I'm really curious to know what your guys' thoughts are on this story. The third story, The Flower Garden and the Woman Who Could Conjure. In this story, we learn that after Kay disappears, even though he's forgotten about everyone, they haven't forgotten about him. In particular, Gerda's very upset. So she believes he's dead, but then like a bunch of birds fly by and tell her that's not the case. So she believes that the river carried Kay away. So she thinks if she throws her favorite red shoes into the river, that the river will return Kay to her. She does this, but the river brings her shoes back. So then she thinks, oh, like if I put it out further into the river, then the river will take my offering and bring me back Kay. So she climbs into a boat to try and get out into the middle of the river, and the boat kind of loses control and she gets swept up by the river. She travels downstream for hours until an old woman sees her and pulls her out of the river using her crutch. Gerda tells her her story, and the woman invites her to stay. She says, you know, it's likely Kay will pass by this point anyways, so if she sticks around, Kay will eventually come along. Gerda's pretty tired at this point, so she agrees to it. And also, this woman has like a huge flower garden, and we already know Gerda loves flowers, so she decides to stay. Now, we soon discover that the old woman has magic, and she loves conjuring up pretty things, particularly flowers. And she likes Gerda a lot and she wants her to stay, so she hides the roses in her garden. She actually forces them back into the earth. So Gerda stays there for quite a while and like completely forgets about Kay. But the old woman has this hat that has roses on it, and one day Gerda sees the rose and she remembers that she's forgotten Kay. So then she starts going through the garden trying to find where the roses are, cries, and the roses are like fertilized by her tears or something because they come out of the earth, and they tell her that Kay's definitely not dead because they were just in the earth and he wasn't down there. So then she starts asking all the flowers in the garden if they know where Kay is, and all of them, like, they tell her stories. None of them have any information about Kay, so she decides to leave the old woman and continue in her search. But by this point it's autumn, and Gerda continues on her journey feeling pretty bleak. So now we're on to the 4th story, which is titled The Prince and the Princess. Now at this point, Gerda is just asking every animal or rosebush she sees if they've seen Kay, and eventually she comes across this crow who tells her the story of a really smart princess who decided she wanted to get married. So she invites a ton of men to come and meet her to see if they vibe. But for some reason, once they enter into her castle and see like her massive wealth, they get kind of dumb and they don't know how to talk to her. So she's really disappointed. And like these are like princes and lords, and they're all just unable to deal with her massive amounts of wealth. You know, they walk in and they see like the guards are wearing gold-plated armor, and the servants are all decked out in silver. It's too much for them. But eventually, this guy in beggar's clothing arrives and impresses her with how well-spoken he is. They end up getting married, and Gerda is convinced this is Kay. She's like, Kay is so clever, this has to be him, that's something he would totally do, he would definitely win the heart of a princess. She has a lot of faith in this guy who was like a jerk right up until he left. Now Gerda's so convinced that she begs the crow to take her to the palace. And the crow agrees, and with the help of his sweetheart, they sneak Gerda into the castle. And once in the castle, she finds her way to their sleeping chamber, which is just like, it's so creepy. But she makes her way to their chambers, but goes up and then realizes it's not Kay. She gets really upset, but the prince and princess take a shining to her. So they say, like, you should stay, you can have a position in court, but she says, no, I want to find my friend Kay. So they let her stay the night, and then the next day they send her off in like a golden carriage, and they give her all these fancy furs, and she goes on her way. She leaves the prince and the princess feeling pretty lucky because all these people just seem to be so gung-ho to help her. So this brings us to the fifth story, which is The Little Robber Girl. Now, as the title suggests, this is where Gerda's luck starts to run out a little bit. So she's traveling in this gold carriage, and some robbers, well, decide to rob her. They almost kill Gerda, but luckily there's a little robber girl that's traveling with them who takes a liking to her and asks them to spare her so that she can have a playmate. Now that sounds really friendly in theory, but in the story itself, it's actually really creepy because she's constantly like holding a knife to Gerda's neck, and she's always threatening that she could kill her at like any moment if she wanted to. I don't know about you guys, but that's how I keep all my friends around. She also forces Gerda to give up all the clothes that the prince and the princess gave her so that the little robber girl can wear them. It's at this point that the girl asks Gerda if she is a princess, and Gerda says no and tells her her story. The little robber girl loves this story so much, she gets Gerda to say it over and over again. And one of these times that Gerda tells the story, some pigeons that the robber girl is keeping as well overhear, and they tell Gerda that they actually saw Kay and the Snow Queen, that the Snow Queen nearly ran them over, destroyed their nest, and killed their young in the process. They tell Gerda that there's a reindeer that the robbers have that would be able to tell her how to get to where the Snow Queen lives, because they're fairly certain that she's in a country called Lapland. The robber girl demands that the reindeer tells them if this is true, and the reindeer confirms it. So by this point, the robber girl has become quite sympathetic towards Gerda, so she plots with Gerda and the reindeer to get her out of there, because at this point the robber band that they're with are quite insistent that Gerda not be freed. So the little robber girl says, listen, my mom gets drunk around lunch every day, and then she passes out drunk. So all we have to do is wait for her to do this, and then we'll be able to sneak you out of here. So that's exactly what she does. She gives Gerda some mittens and some boots to make sure that she doesn't freeze. She also ties her to the reindeer before sending them off. I don't know why. I guess it's a good idea because people keep tying her to reindeers. I don't know. You'll see. So Gerda leaves the little robber girl feeling closer than ever to to finding Kay. Now this brings us to the 6th story, the Lapland woman and the Finland woman. So Gerda and this reindeer leave the robber girl and they're traveling through snowstorms to get to Lapland. The reindeer knows the way and they get there pretty quickly and they stumble across this hut. Now they're so cold, they literally just stumble into this cottage. And there's this old Lapland woman in there who happily takes them in, helps them out, feeds them, warms them up, makes sure that they're okay. And she says that their trip isn't over. They have to keep going because the Snow Queen is actually in Finland. But it's okay because she has a friend in Finland who will be able to help them out. So she writes a note for her friend on stockfish, like dried stockfish. That doesn't seem like a really good, like, paper material, but like, who knows? So she gives them this dried fish with a note on it and sends them off to Finland. And they do find the Finland woman's hut. However, when they enter it, it's so warm in there, and they find this woman like completely naked. She's not wearing any clothes, and she's just cooking in this hot hut naked. So they tell the Finland woman their stories. We don't really know how they know, but for some reason they know that this woman is magical, so they're begging her to give them something to be able to defeat the Snow Queen. And she says she can't give Gerda anything more than what she already has. Here's a direct quote from the story. "I can give her no greater power than she already has," said the woman. "Don't you see how strong she is? How men and animals are obliged to serve her, and how well she has gotten through the world, barefooted as she is. She cannot receive any power from me greater than she now has, which consists of her own purity and innocence of heart. If she cannot herself obtain access to the Snow Queen and remove the little glass fragment from little Kay, we can do nothing to help her." Simply put, you're on your own. The woman tells them that time is running out, and she ties Gerda to the reindeer and sends her off. Sends her off before remembering to put on her mittens or her boots. So off she goes as she gets nearer to the Snow Queen's castle. All these shapes start appearing in the snow. There's like this unnatural snowstorm where these snowflakes rise up and kind of become creatures like porcupines and snakes. And Gerda's so afraid. They're described as being like the guardians of the Snow Queen. Gerda's so afraid, understandably. So she starts praying. These prayers stream out of her mouth, and her breath kind of forms like a protective stream for her. So it keeps these like snow creatures at bay. And eventually the stream gets so large, she sees angels in the stream of her prayers protecting her. And now this is the point where we start to learn what happened to Kay. Now, the 7th story of the palace of the Snow Queen and what happened there at last. So in this story, we learn that since Kay arrived at the Snow Queen's palace, he has been dragging pieces of ice around, trying to build something. We learn that the Snow Queen has told him she won't let him leave until he spells out the word eternity, and then she leaves him, but he gets so cold, he completely forgets what word he's supposed to be spelling. So he continues to toil away, building these like ice sculptures, not knowing how to free himself. Now, the Snow Queen leaves him almost immediately after telling him he's not allowed to leave until he can spell out eternity. And she goes to like wreak havoc somewhere else. We don't really hear about her after this. he eventually becomes so deep in thought trying to remember what it is he has to do to get out of there that he becomes so still it almost looks like he's dead. And this is the point that Gerda storms the doors of the castle. And thinking that he's dead, she throws her arms around him and starts crying. Her tears are so powerful that they penetrate Kay's chest and wash away the fragment of the looking glass that has affected his heart. This is enough to break Kay's concentration, so he looks at her. When she sees this, she's so overjoyed, she starts singing the hymn that they loved so much before he got that piece in his heart. It causes Kay to burst into tears, and this washes away the final piece of the looking glass from his eye. This is when he remembers Gerda, he remembers his family, he remembers the word that he needs to spell in order to break free from the Snow Queen's captivity. So they spell it out just in case she decides to return, so that if she does return, they'll be able to say, hey, look, like we did what you asked. And then they get the hell out of there. It's also said in the story that Gerda kisses him all over, which relieves his hypothermia. So now they leave and they retrace Gerda's steps and learn what happened to some of the characters that help her find him. The reindeer rides with them all the way back. The Finland and the Lapland woman set them up with food and a sled for the rest of their way home. They learn that the crow died, so his wife is now a widow. And they actually even end up running into the little robber girl. And it's really funny because the robber girl straight up asks Kay if he's worth someone traveling across the world to save him. Finally, Gerda and Kay arrive at their hometown. They realize in the time that they were gone, they've grown into adults. It's weird. The final paragraph of the story is as follows. The roses out on the roof were in full bloom and peeped in at the little window. And there stood the little chairs on which they had sat when children. And Kay and Gerda seated themselves each in their own chair and held each other by the hand while the cold, empty grandeur of the Snow Queen's palace vanished from their memories like a painful dream. The grandmother sat in God's bright sunshine, and she read out loud from the Bible. Except ye become as a little child, ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of God. And Kay and Gerda looked into each other's eyes, and all at once understood the words of the old song. I'm assuming the old song that they're referring to is the hymn that Gerda and Kay loved so much, and that actually ended up saving Kay from the looking glass in his eye. But there's no specification about that. 1 second while I do my lips. So there we have it. The 7 stories of the Snow Queen. Where do we even start? Was I the only one who felt like when Gerda's adventure started, it just like spiraled? And I felt like there was no real direction until she met the robber girl. I feel like she just went on this wild goose chase and just happened to end up in the right place. This is where I wish I could have just read you all 7 stories in full, because there's so many weird details that popped up. Like, the stories that the flowers told were just like the weirdest thing in the world. They were so random, and I went back a few times trying to search out meaning from the stories, but I guess no one else has really done too much looking into that part of the story. A lot of the research that I found focused on the kind of like religious aspect of things, which is definitely like a main theme in this story. I'm not arguing that. But if you're gonna read any of these stories, like say you were just going to read one of these stories, I would honestly recommend reading the story of the flower garden and the woman who could conjure, because it's like reading a description of someone's mushroom trip. It's so weird, like all these flowers just talking to her, and then she gets angry at them because they're not telling her what she wants to hear. I don't know. In my research, I didn't come across anything that could explain like what the flowers might represent. So I guess we're just gonna have to chalk them up to being really chatty flowers. So since I didn't read you all the nitty-gritty details that Hans Christian Andersen wrote for us, I'm gonna talk about a big theme in this, and that's the good versus evil dichotomy. These are the two biggest contrasting themes in this story, I feel. Good versus evil is a dichotomy that is used over and over again in fairy tales. But what I found different about this one is usually there's some sort of resolution of like the good guy wins or evil triumphs. But in the Snow Queen, we don't have the satisfaction of dethroning the Snow Queen. She still goes on to terrorize another day. And we don't squash the demon that made the looking glass. The whole story feels kind of anticlimactic in that sense. But realistically, Gerda achieved what she was trying to do all along. 1 second, I just need one last thing to complete this look. Here we go. But realistically, Gerda achieved what she was trying to do all along. She finds Kay and brings him back home. For Andersen, good seems to be synonymous in this story with being a Christ child, or a believer of Christ, whereas he associates bad with being too focused on intelligence. I mean, the demon has a school to teach people about how horrible the world actually is. And Kay forgets how to pray when he's infected with the looking glass. Which says to me that like the knowledge that he gains blocks some part of his memory, specifically his innocence and faith. I think we can agree that on some level, Andersen was implying that diving too deeply into the intellectual world can distract you from worshiping God and staying true to your faith. But more than anything, I think he was trying to tell us that we shouldn't value intelligence above everything because it could be our undoing. That you could be trying to spell eternity in ice for, well, an eternity. This is my Snow Queen look. It's kind of started out as a mess, but I think it turned out pretty well for just using eyeshadow and concealer. And that was the story of the Snow Queen. So let me know in the comments below what you thought of this story. I'd love to hear your thoughts on which characters you thought were who. I'm pretty sure the little robber girl was the inspiration for Kristoff. The reindeer is obviously Sven. Olaf is maybe the crow. Anna is definitely Gerda. And Elsa seems to be a mixture of Kay and the Snow Queen. But definitely a very different story from what the Disney series gave us. I'd really love to hear from you guys what you thought about all of this. If you liked this video, if you like my vibe, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take it easy. Ooh, I'm struggling with these little jewels. Woo, lost one. Try it again. Round 2. Slow-mo action shot.